Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Talk, Come Follow Me. We're excited to study chapters 28 through 33 of Genesis today, where we're going to have plenty of opportunities to talk about real life families with real life drama and the power of covenants in our lives.
It's going to be a lot of real today.
Very real. Not just, the Old Testament gives us so many opportunities for very real talks. And we're going to start off today with one right here in Genesis 28.
You know, and can I just say really quickly, we always pray before we start taping, and I've had some conversations with real people having real family situations, and immediately I could feel the Spirit in the studio just inviting us to have a conversation that answers prayer. So we hope that that's what happens. That's always our why, but especially this week with the dynamics and these family relationships, there's some hurt feelings and dynamics that are pretty real.
We'll see this in Genesis 28. We're going to pick up where we left off last week with Jacob and Esau, a problematic family dynamic to say the least, right? So in this particular episode, in Genesis 28, verses 1 through 5, you'll recall that Isaac sends Jacob out to find a wife, this time in the covenant line. Okay, so Esau has already married, but it was a couple of wives who were not in the covenant line. Now, Isaac and Rebekah both made their displeasure pretty public about that, right? For Esau.
Right.
And so when they're sending off Jacob, they're like, be better than your brother, basically, is the subtext. You will see in verse 6 of Genesis 28, when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to take him a wife, that he was blessed and gave him a charge saying, thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan, kind of a jab at Esau. Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not his father, Esau, went unto Ishmael to look for a wife. So Ishmael, this is interesting because this is Abraham's bloodline now.
Right.
So it's almost like, look, there's a lot of debate as to sort of the motives behind Esau going to get another wife out of Abraham's bloodline this time. Most people believe, from what I've read over the last month or so, most people believe that he was trying to just gain approval from his parents, right? He saw that his previous choices of wives had not pleased them, and now he's like, hey, Dad, what if I marry someone over here, from this bloodline? Will you accept me now?
Uncle Laban.
Yes, Uncle Laban. So look, here's my question, and this is a hard question. That's why I appreciate what you said at the beginning of this episode. We need the Spirit as we contemplate these questions because they're kind of difficult. How do we respond to our children when they make choices that are not in line with the covenants they've made at baptism or in the temple? To put it differently, how can parents and leaders and friends strike a balance between remaining committed to their own covenants while simultaneously staying committed to maintaining a loving relationship with those in their family who aren't keeping their covenants?
Which is every family I know.
Right? It's like in our attempt to keep our covenants, that's our justification, we drive a wedge between us and the very people we covenant with, really. What do you think about that?
Well, I do feel like this is a conversation that any family that's going through adult children dating and choosing spouses, in-law relationships where it's like, wait, that's who you picked? And I don't even want to venture to guess what my in-laws thought when Rob was like, I think I'm going to marry this lady. And my mother-in-law, who's so talented in ways I'm not, was like, really? She can't sew, she can't cook, she can't can. So I think in that sense, this conversation and question you just posed is so relevant and reminds me of the conversation we had on a Real Talk Friends episode with the Bordens. And if you haven't watched that, we taped it. It is. And we taped it during the middle of the pandemic, so it's StreamYard. It's a different format. But I love what they said is that their parents were praying that they would come to the truth in their journey and the experiences they had out of the covenant and away from the church and different relationships they had. It was crucial, I think, when you look at certain values that we've taught from the pulpit. There's not a lot of families in the 70s and 80s that were probably meeting those standards. And I think we're doing better having conversations like this where we're like, hey, is your family not checking all the boxes?
Maybe doesn't may not look
Right.
that sort of idyllic way
Right.
that we've portrayed for so long.
Which then creates that dissonance in our hearts of like, I'm trying to live my covenants, teach them to
Right.
my kids, then they grow up and make their choices, and it's a varying version of how they're going to keep them. And then we sit in a general conference talk and we're like, wait, we did the wrong family home evening lesson. We didn't do Come Follow Me the right way because look at who Esau picked, right? And we fill in the names of our kids. And so I don't have the answers. All I know
I don't
is
either.
I'm
Let's be
literally
clear about that.
in this phase. You have one married, I have one not, and one that's graduating high school. And I pray a lot. I tell my kids, we've got two. I'm going to love whoever you love because I don't want that division. But that's hard. It's hard when it feels like the thing you gave your kids, we're going to talk a lot covenants this week, that they're saying thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times that parents, in the name of our commitment to our covenants, right? Put God first in all things, which is a beautiful and sort of central theme of any true disciple. But to put God first is to put love first. And so there has to be a balance. And this is a wrestle where I'm glad you said we don't have any answers to this, because the answer to this will be different for every family. How am I going to stay true to my covenants, stay true to God, and put him first in all things, especially when I have a child, right, who chooses differently, to go a different way? How will I maintain that relationship of love and respect and kindness with them, even though I don't agree with what they're doing? That's a difficult balance to strike, but I think it's a necessary balance to strike for all of us. And for me, I'll just say what I just said a second ago. To stay committed to God and to our covenants is to stay committed to loving relationships.
And we're going to see as we further this conversation where everybody involved had to have more experiences maybe to have those lessons learned. And I guess I would go back to a few weeks ago when we said God's not panicked if we kind of mess it up. But what a great week to kind of say, are we putting our love of God and in keeping our covenants in a way that stops us from loving people that we are charged to love?
So as if Jacob and Esau needed more opportunities to not feel united. Now, the division seems maybe even worse now that Esau detects his parents' sort of disregard and dislike of his choice for marriage partners, Anyway.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we wanted to talk about further about, what is he getting wrong and right, and how is this going to feed into what happens with this further relationship. Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to say on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay, and so I think it's a good revision. We say, well, wait, why would they get so mad about this? Go back to what the original covenant is, right? The original covenant is about posterity and lands and being blessed. And so I think we sometimes say, well, what's all the fuss about? Why are you going to ruin this relationship over what? This is a pretty big covenant.
Let's try to understand Rebecca and Isaac's sort of preoccupation here.
Right, and their big charge, one of their big stewardships is this covenant and all the posterity that's going to come through that line. So you can see it's a pretty big why. Yeah. My husband was just at a stake conference leadership meeting, and one of the full-time sister missionaries in our area, and I hope she's watching, raised her hand when someone posed the question in the leadership meeting, why are so many youth leaving the church? And she said profoundly, if you let us know why we're supposed to stay, we'll stay.
Everybody wants a why.
Everybody
needs a why.
Right. And we've talked, I think, just a few weeks ago about my why is my covenants. And it kind of, her comment got a little brushed over, but that evening, at the evening session, the visiting general authority invited her back up. So he sensed that too. And I just had another conversation with her, and I just said, I think this is where are we missing? This is the Jacob's ladder scene that we're going to start talking about in Genesis 28:12, right? That Jacob dreams and he sees the ladder and it's set up on the earth and the top of it reaches to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Right here we see that the covenant that he is seeing is this endowment, this promised blessing. And so whether it's in the temples or in our homes, when we're talking about our why to our children, it is painful when we think, okay, wait, this is a big deal. This is not just a little thing. This is God saying, I want to endow you with this power. And Jacob is seeing it. And
I love the imagery of the ladder and the rungs on that, like, has been taught before, that these are a progression of covenants, of
that bring us
becoming
back.
like God.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of cool? And this happening on Jacob's way, sort of kind of as he's transitioning from home to Laban to marriage to all these things.
Which isn't that a pattern of God of like, let me get you ready for what you're about to do?
Pretty
And
cool.
I don't get dreams, but it's cool
don't either.
that,
I wish I did.
I have a best friend that does. Shout out to Shauna, because she'll have some about me, and she gets on the phone, had a dream about you last night. I'm like, okay, you better tell me what the revelation was, right?
It was good.
Right. So here we see that this endowment is important. It shows the covenants. Genesis 28:17. I think it's crucial where words matter, and we talk about words here, right? It says, and he was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Right now, I think this is important for your little kids, where if you're reading this verse, wait, who wants to go to a dreadful place, right?
Yeah.
So this is good where translation is helpful, and maybe different language translations change. The New Oxford annotated, did I say that right? No, annotated Bible. The word for dreadful really means awesome. And so then if you see that, the meaning of this is an awesome house of God. And so if you take the ladder and its covenants and the temple, and you can see the why. Now Jacob's going out to find his spouse, and he's really clear that this is an endowment of power that helps us progress. John Taylor said at the Logan Temple dedication that this is not simply a metaphorical expression in verse 17, but in a reality, for it is that house, and it will be the house to be built on this ground that is the most sacred ordinances of God to be. And so if we think about the temples and our covenants, and it's the house of God, you can see why there was so much emphasis. And is it a helpful week for us to talk about why it's important for us to be talking about covenants and what our why is?
I've had conversations with people who have sort of left the church behind for a while, and they are sort of resentful that they see their parents as not loving them or accepting them as much since their decision. And I never want to I never want to justify sort of the rejection of our children when they make bad choices or anything like that. But I always say to these kids, have you tried to just see their perspective? Do you understand why this means so much to them? They may not be going about this the best way.
Right.
Could Isaac and Rebekah have done more to help Esau feel more loved and accepted despite his bad choices? Probably. All of us can do better with that, right? But I just encourage all of us to give each other a little grace, to try to understand why it's such a big deal to our parents or our loved ones who are encouraging us to go a certain direction.
Yeah.
It's because they feel like that's what it's all about. And they've had profound experiences where this is awesome, right? Like Jacob.
It's given them power, so they want their
They
kids
just
to
want
have
to pass
that.
it on.
Yeah.
That's all.
I remember having a conversation via the phone with my son, who's trying to help his sister, who's younger than him, understand the power of covenants. And he just said, you're going to make them, and it's not going to always feel like it's that big of a deal. But then when you keep them, it gives you power to keep them in the future when it does get harder. And I think right here, Jacob's parents are saying, before you go out there, remember, are you going to choose someone that's going to help you in keeping those? But is any family doing this like linear experience? I haven't met them. They're not in the scriptures. I've combed the scriptures. They're not there either. And this week it shows exactly that. Should we jump to a love story?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Jacob and Rachel.
Right. So Jacob arrives and he meets Rachel, one of Laban's daughters, right? And their family. And it's at the famous well. And we're gonna hear about this well in the New Testament next year. And it's one of my favorite spaces because it's where Jesus has a really intimate conversation with someone that has changed my life. And so this is that well. And that's why it's called Jacob's Well. And,
Such a dramatic moment.
Right.
I have a friend who teaches. Shout out to Robbie Taggart, but he's so what's the word?
Expressive.
Expressive, and he'll laugh at that. But I just remember him acting this out. Jacob sees Rachel at the well. He runs over and he uncovers the well, lifts the rock by himself for show of strength.
Because he's been doing CrossFit or something.
He sees her and he just shouts, runs, grabs her, and kisses her. I mean, it's pretty dramatic. Man.
Yeah, it's like it's a good rom-com.
Yes,
Probably not a lot of com, just a lot of rom. Yeah. And Genesis 29, right? This is the beginning of this story. He is serving 7 years for Rachel, and it says, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her.
7 years was nothing for
I know,
Rachel,
and this ruins because every girl's like, wait, I don't think you're texting me the loving messages of the Old Testament, right? Like you could send this verse on and right. So he agrees to work for Laban, and there's a little switcheroo.
There's a little switcheroo that happens, and we're gonna cover the Laban story in like 60 seconds.
Let's do it.
Because we're gonna focus on Jacob and Esau at the end of this story.
Right.
But in the interim, he works 7 years. He's ready to marry Rachel, and that night, when he traditionally should go to his tent after the marriage festival and celebration, the father of the bride takes the daughter to the tent, sort of delivers her to the groom, and they enter the tent, and the marriage is consummated, right? Well, Laban brings his oldest daughter, Leah, to the tent and puts her in there, and Jacob inadvertently consummates the marriage with the wrong woman and wakes up in the morning and is like, what in the world has happened? Now, this...
Are you going to pause and do a little...
I understand.
Some people are like, wait, pause?
I hear it all the time. They're like, how is that even possible? And there really are some good potential explanations.
Right.
It's the end of a marriage feast. Drinking wine was not discouraged at marriage feasts.
Bacon was.
Bacon was, but not wine.
Right.
So Jacob may have been most likely a bit fuzzy. Mm-hmm. The tent would have been dark. The daughter would have been veiled, maybe similar body size and shape as her sister. And it's just take it from there. Jacob wakes up in the morning with some clarity and realizes, oh my goodness. Now, I don't want to make light of this. I looked at this, I tried to look at it through Jacob's perspective, and I thought, this is trauma and betrayal on a scale that I've never experienced.
Especially if you think of the sacrifice, the service,
7
the
years.
7 years. I did an alliteration there,
I
right?
liked it.
Sacrifice, service in 7 years, right? Of course he's traumatized.
God. And so I just wondered, have, again, another opportunity to ask hard questions about family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever felt used or lied to by a family member, extended or immediate? And so just try to consider how incredibly hurtful this was for Jacob. And man, especially if so now Jacob, he's under covenant like all of us are to kind of live like Jesus and be kind and forgive and love. How hard would that be after such a betrayal?
And so that leads to the question, what does he do in response?
Yeah.
He doesn't just, stomp out of the camp or the city or the town or whatever it is. He stays and he keeps going forward. Sister Bruton says, keeping our covenants demonstrates our love for the Savior and our Father in heaven. Of all the reasons we ought to be more diligent in our covenant keeping, this reason is more compelling than all the love that we talked about, right? Yeah. But the Old Testament shows these moments, hinge points where it could be about something totally different than love. Yep. So then what happens?
Well, he sticks with it, right? And then Laban says, hey, just keep Leah as your wife and you can have Rachel. You can marry her too in 1 week from today and just serve me for 7 more years. I mean, there's some manipulation here. There's some pretty hairy dynamics going on in this family, and some hurtful treatment of each other. Jacob agrees to it. And that's when the competition for babies begins, right?
Right. And you know what? I would just say at this point, I think it's important that we see, my impression in preparing for today was having this conversation, there's some empathy from this experience that may be setting Jacob up for a reunion and a forgiveness story that's about to come.
I love your insight on that.
Right? Because Esau definitely knows what it feels like to answer your question that you just asked. Yeah. He definitely feels at times some tricking, some being pushed out of the way of what he thought might be his. We know this story from a few weeks ago. And so I wonder, like we talked about sympathy versus empathy, Jacob's having an empathetic experience.
This is where Jacob
training.
Gets it.
Yeah, he's like, hey.
Oh, this is how Esau felt.
Oh,
Holy cow.
wait. Some goat hair, and I guess he didn't feel so good when he gave up for some porridge. So
by the time Jacob is done with his experience with Laban, it's 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, and then Laban convinces him to stay for 6 more years. He's 20 years in the making of this empathetic reunion that's going to happen eventually.
So maybe waiting 18 months while someone serves a mission isn't...
Right, maybe not. Well, and again, God isn't panicking. It's
Right,
his timeline.
right.
And sometimes these relationships take a long time to heal. And so I would just say that to maybe our audience. If you're in the middle of a problematic family dynamic that you
Betrayal.
are just hoping for healing, healing does come. That's my testimony. But it sometimes takes a long time. And for some of us, it won't happen until the next life. Let's be real about that. But healing can and does come.
So the race for babies, you want to do a little quick synopsis of that?
You know, maybe we'll skip over it. You can just study that on your own. How the 12 sons of Israel, Jacob is renamed Israel when he covenants with God. And he now, well, you know, he's going to have
Leah?
Leah is his first wife, Rachel, second wife. Rachel can't have babies. Leah has 4 sons. Rachel gives Jacob Bilhah. Bilhah gives him 2 more sons.
Leah gives him
Zilpah, her handmaid. She gives him 2 more sons. Leah then has 2 more sons. Rachel finally has the 11th and 12th sons, Joseph and Benjamin, who will come later. But
and we'll
wow.
talk more about that. Yeah. So, what do you feel as we see Jacob and Esau? And they're at this point, if you get to Genesis 33 this week, right? Genesis 33 specifically, verses 3 through 11. And Jacob bows himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. And I thought that was interesting.
Well, he's nervous, right?
Yeah.
So now at this point, Jacob has all these sons. He has this huge posterity. He has all these herds. And he's drawing some boundaries between him and Laban, very necessary. And he's going back home, but man, he's got to face Esau.
Jacob and Laban have kind of a peace moment where they build this little monument and say, how about you stay there and I'll stay here and we're not going to keep fighting.
If you want some cool stuff about reconciliation, study those chapters as well. There's a lot of beautiful examples in this week's reading about this theme, right? Problematic family relationships and eventual healing. Jacob and Laban, and now Jacob and Esau. Jacob sends a flood of gifts to Esau first, hopefully to soften him, and then those verses that you can talk about that beautiful healing.
And that name
gorgeous.
change is letting God prevail. And I think what a great week of saying sometimes it takes a while to let God prevail, right? Israel means let God prevail. We know that. And so as verse 4 happens, I wonder if Jacob's like, oh, God is prevailing here, right?
Yes.
Because Esau runs to meet him, embraces him, falls on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept.
And I love his questions in 8 and 9. And this is what chapter? This is Genesis 33. He's like, brother, to Jacob, why you give me all these gifts, man? This isn't necessary. And Jacob's like, I just wanted you to know I'm so sorry.
Here's my
I
gifts.
love you. I'm so sorry for how things ended with us, and I want reunion. And it happened.
Yeah, and verse 11 I think is so beautiful because God hath dealt graciously with me and because I have enough.
Yeah.
And I think what a beautiful, both were filled, right? Yeah. Both felt God prevail in their lives. And because they had enough, I think sometimes when we're not in a space of feeling enough, I know I act in fear.
Right.
When I feel like God is prevailing in my life and I feel like there's enough, then I don't get triggered as easily. I don't over respond or hustle. And I think in this situation, it's like, no, I have really learned a lot and I feel blessed and I feel enough and I'm going to be gracious with you because I'm enough, right?
Well, hopefully this week in your study of Genesis 28 through 33, as you look at these examples of family disruption and pain and hurt, we hope that you'll find help and healing in those examples of sort of resolution. Maybe I'll just finish here with a quick teaching from Elder Gong that I love. He says this to all of us who are in difficult relationships. Trust God and His miracles. We and our relationships can change. Through the atonement of Christ, the Lord, we can put off our selfish natural self and become a child of God, meek, humble, full of faith, and appropriate trust. I love that, talking about boundaries. Trust God's inspiration to discern wisely. We can forgive others in the right time and in the right way, as the Lord says we must, while being wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And then this last part I love. He said, condemnation and forgiveness both begin by recognizing a wrong, but condemnation focuses on the past. forgiveness looks liberatingly to the future.
Elder Gong, you just got a fist bump if you happen to be watching. That's such a beautiful reminder, and it leads into our invitation this week. Is there someone that you can reconcile with this week? And we both want to make sure we understand the sensitivity of this, and when there is betrayal and trauma, it's not an easy fix. It sometimes takes a lot of years. It took a lot of years for Jacob and Esau. But potentially, is there a way to open up to what reconciliation could look like? Maybe like with Laban, it doesn't mean full access in your life, but it means a healing in your heart. We invite you to consider who you can reconcile with this week, and maybe start taking steps towards that. And we'll see you again next week on Real Talk, Come Follow Me.
Do you like Real Talk, Come Follow Me?
Then like and subscribe.